Bragging is the result of pride, not just any type of pride, ostentatious pride. I have got to be the center of attention. I have got to be the focus. So I'm going to brag all the time. Sometimes you call that, if it's a little person, little man syndrome. Anyone ever heard that? Hopefully you brought a pen, piece of paper. I'm old-fashioned. That's the way I take notes. But what I'm going to share with you, I really would love someday to turn into a book. And this book is really for singles, those who want to get married but are not yet married, and they're dating. Because what I'm sharing with you is something that would help you tremendously to find a mate. Now, if you're already married, you're probably listening to this and going, yeah, but I'm finding out where I went wrong. But anyways, for the last 2 weeks, I've been teaching on the subject of love, and more specifically, the characteristics of love. Because in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 8, Paul described what true love is. And what I mean by true love is agape love, that God type of love. It's not a feeling, it's a choice. It's a decision to love in word and deed a specific way, the God way. But anyways, I want you to notice how Paul describes true love, agape love. This is, again, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 8. It says, love is patient, love is kind, and it is not jealous. Love does not brag, and it is not arrogant. It does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own. It's not provoked. Does not take into account a wrong suffered. It does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but it rejoices with the truth. It bears all things. It believes all things. It hopes all things. It endures all things. Love never fails. Now, in these 5 verses, Paul listed 16 characteristics of true love. 8 are positive characteristics. In other words, they describe what love is. Love is patient. Love is kind, etc. And 8 are negative characteristics. In other words, they describe what love is not. Love is not jealous. It does not brag. It's not arrogant. You see, sometimes it's easier to describe something by telling you what it's not than it is by telling you what it is. So that's what Paul is doing. He listed 8 things that true love is not. And if you see any of these negative characteristics, you know that it's not a genuine agape love. It's either one of the other types of love or it's a counterfeit. Now, last week we studied the very first negative characteristic mentioned, and it's love is not jealous. This morning we're going to move on and we're going to cover the next 3. Love does not brag. Love is not arrogant, and love does not act unbecomingly. Now, these 3 characteristics go together. In fact, they build on each other, and they're connected in that they usually accompany each other because they come from the very same source. In other words, a braggart is almost always arrogant, and an arrogant braggart almost always acts unbecomingly. And that's what I mean by these characteristics go together, build on each other, and almost always accompany each other because they come from the very same source. Is everyone with me? Now, turn back to 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and let's read verse 4 and the first part of verse number 5. Love is patient, love is kind, and is not jealous. Love does not brag and is not arrogant. It does not act unbecomingly. Now, let me give you a brief explanation of each one of these characteristics, and then we'll make application. So, look back at verse number 4, and I want you to underline the word brag. Love does not brag. Now, the word brag is translated from the Greek word perperuamahi. It's only used once in the Bible, and it's here in verse number 4. It literally means ostentatious rhetorical boasting. In fact, that's a very important definition. If you're taking notes, I want you to write this down. It literally means ostentatious rhetorical boasting. In other words, trying to impress others by bragging. You see, ostentatious means you're trying to impress others in a way that makes you the center of attention or the focus. And in this case, you're doing it by bragging. You can do it in different ways. Some of you dress ostentatiously. You want people to look at you. You want when you walk into the room. You know, how many of you remember when the punk fashion was going on? And you went out to California and you might see someone, the way they were dressed, they shaved both sides of the head, but they had a mohawk. And the mohawk stood about 8 inches tall and it was all these funky colors. You know, when they walked in, you couldn't help but stare, especially if you're from Oklahoma. Yes. And then it's like, why are you staring? Well, they want me to stare. They're dressing ostentatiously. They want to be the center of attention. They want to be the focus. Everyone with me? So in this case, Paul is talking about ostentatious bragging. You're doing it by bragging. Think of a person that always has to one-up someone. If you tell an interesting story, they have to tell a better story, a more interesting story. But the reason they're that way is because they want to be the center of attention. They want to be the focus of everyone's attention, which is exactly what ostentatious means. So, why is this contrary to true love? Well, Paul said that agape love doesn't ostentatiously brag. Here's what's interesting. We just put in there, love does not brag, and then we have problems with that. Because do we brag on our kids if they get a prestigious scholarship? Do we brag on our kids if they win an event? Well, if I love you, son, I'm sorry, I can't brag on you. No. This word means ostentatiously bragging. Everyone with me? So, what's interesting is Paul said that agape love doesn't ostentatiously brag. And again, I'm emphasizing the word ostentatiously because that's the key to understanding why Paul said that true love, agape love, doesn't brag. Remember, ostentatious means that you're doing it in order to become the center of attention or to become the main focus. And true love, agape love, focuses on the person you love, not yourself. A person who focuses on themselves and has to be the center of attention doesn't have agape love. You know, I kind of enjoy listening to music that's not Christian. Don't throw stones at me. But I want you to listen to Justin Bieber's song, Love Yourself. Here's a portion of the lyrics. 'Cause if you like the way you look that much, oh baby, you should go and love yourself. And if you think that I'm still holding on to something, you should go and love yourself. How many of you know that? Oh, yeah. All right. This song that he's written is about an ostentatious person. Egotistical, narcissist. In fact, in one line it says, my mama likes everyone, but she don't like you. And see, I understand that because my mom liked everyone. And if she didn't like someone, there was a reason for it. So I listened to this song and I think, wow. But he's singing about an ostentatious person. Someone who has to be the center of attention. And he doesn't have true love, or they don't have true love. They only love themselves. So true love doesn't ostentatiously brag. Instead, it puts the focus on the person you love. They are the center of attention, not you. I like the way that R.C. Linsky says it. You might not know who Linsky is. He's dead now, but he was a renowned Greek scholar who wrote wonderful commentaries on the original Greek. So he wrote critical commentaries, basically. But this is what he says about this. True love never detracts from the praise that is due another, nor tries to make that person seem less and himself seem more important by comparison. Someone who deserves to be praised, true love wants to put the spotlight on them. Someone who doesn't have love, they don't like the spotlight being over there. If you're with someone who can never let you have the spotlight, but they're always hijacking the limelight, listen to me, they don't love you. They love themselves. Therefore, they need to take Justin Bieber's advice and just go love themselves. Yeah. Now, turn back to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse number 4, and I want you to underline the word arrogant. Love is patient, love is kind, and is not jealous. Love does not brag, and is not arrogant. Arrogant is translated from the Greek word phusiao. Phusiao. And what's interesting is that Paul is the only New Testament author that uses this Greek word. And of the 7 times that he uses it, 6 are in this epistle, the book of 1 Corinthians. Because the Corinthians definitely had a problem with phusiao. But what does phusiao mean? It literally means to have an exaggerated sense of self. An exaggerated sense of self-importance. Now, I want you to understand something. The emphasis is on exaggerated. They have an exaggerated sense of self, an exaggerated sense of self-importance. You know, Paul told us in Romans chapter 12, verse number 3, not to think more highly of ourselves than we ought to. Take a look at what it says. For I say through the grace given unto me to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, according as God hath dealt to every man the measure of faith. Now, most people miss what Paul is saying because that translation sounds kind of religious. So let me explain what Paul is saying and what he's not saying. Paul is not saying not to think highly of yourself. He's saying don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to. I want you to notice how the NLT translates this verse because it's actually a better translation of what the original Greek says. I know that's hard to believe, but it is. Notice what it says. Because of the privilege and authority God has given me, I give each of you this warning. Don't think you are better than you really are. Be honest in your evaluation of yourselves, measuring yourselves by the faith God has given us. You see, if we don't objectively evaluate what we're good at and what we're not good at, how would we know what we're gifted to do and what we're called to do? You see, what we're called to do, we're gifted to do, and what we're gifted to do, we're called to do. So if someone comes to me and says, I really don't know what I'm supposed to do with my life, you know what I ask them? What are you good at? And if they've been raised in church all their life, well, you know, I'm not good at anything. You think God made someone worthless? No. You have to honestly evaluate yourself to know what you're good at and what you're not good at. So Paul's not saying don't think highly of yourself. He's saying don't think more highly of yourself than you should. In other words, you need to objectively evaluate yourself so you can recognize what you're good at and what you're not good at. Now, let's relate this to what Paul said in regards to love. Whenever we think more highly of ourselves than we ought to, we have an exaggerated sense of self, which leads to an exaggerated sense of self-importance. And again, the emphasis is on exaggerated, which is what phusio means. It doesn't mean a high sense of yourself or you place a high importance on yourself. No. You are so important, Jesus came to die for your sin. You are so important that the creator of this world wants to have an intimate relationship with you. But some of you have a higher sense of self-importance, an exaggerated sense of self-importance. And that's what phusio means. As I said, Paul's the only one that uses this word, and he uses it specifically because he wants you to understand some of you have an exaggerated sense of self, an exaggerated sense of self-importance. So, why would this be contrary to true love, agape love? Well, it's contrary to true love because true love places a greater importance on the person you love than yourself. Did you hear that? True love places a greater importance on the person you love than yourself. Listen to me. Agape love always places a greater importance on the other person than oneself. Always. So when you see someone that's arrogant, that has the characteristics of phusio, that means you'll never be the most important person in their life, at least not as important as they see themselves. When you're dating someone, and what they want's more important than what you want, what they need is more important than what you need, what they desire is more important than what you desire, that their career is more important than your career, that's phusio. They have an exaggerated sense of self-importance. So this is what Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4. If you're taking notes, write this down. Agape love, which is true love, places a greater importance on others than it does itself. Let me just say this. What Lisa needs, wants, and desires is much more important than what I need, want, or desire. And do you know why I feel that way? It's because I love her. And that's what Paul means by love is not arrogant. It's not puffed up. It does not have an exaggerated sense of self-importance. It places a greater importance on others than it does itself. Now, turn back to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 and 5, and I want you to underline the phrase, act unbecomingly. This is something that most of us don't know anything about. But you'll recognize people who act unbecomingly immediately when I teach you. Notice what it says. Love is patient, love is kind. It is not jealous. Love does not brag, and it's not arrogant. It does not act unbecomingly. Now, that particular phrase, act unbecomingly, is translated from the Greek word askemoneo. And what's interesting is that this verb only occurs here and in one other place in the Bible. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 36. Askemoneo connotes shameful behavior, often with sexual overtones. In fact, look at 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse number 36. This is the only other place where this word is used in the New Testament. I'll show you what I'm talking about in this verse. Again, this is the only other place that it's used in the Bible. Notice what it says. If anyone is worried that he might not be acting honorably toward the virgin he is engaged to, and if his passions are too strong, men, you understand what that means. And he feels he ought to marry, he should do as he wants. He is not sinning. They should get married. Now the phrase, not be acting honorably, is the very same Greek word that Paul used in 1 Corinthians 13:5, describing what love is not. Askemoneo. So does everyone understand what this passage of Scripture is saying? What 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 36 is saying? It's saying that if a man is engaged to a virgin and they've been messing around sexually, they need to stop messing around and get married. If not, they're going to get caught, and it will bring shame on her and her family. That's what it means when it says not acting honorably. Askemoneo. Let me explain a little bit about the culture that Paul was writing in, especially the Middle East. They had a shame-honor culture. And what I mean by a shame-honor culture is that your children, your family members, they could either bring honor on the family or they could bring shame on the family. Believe it or not, America and much of Europe actually had a shame-honor culture. Our culture has changed and we no longer have that, but some of you are old enough to remember if someone got pregnant out of wedlock, many times they went to live with another aunt to help take care of them. And then they came back. Well, what it was is they were pregnant out of wedlock. They had the baby somewhere else. Someone else in the family maybe adopted them. Then they came back to live. There was this ostracizing of it because that brought shame on the family. Everyone understand what I'm talking about? Well, in the Bible in the Middle East, it's much worse. If you remember, Jacob had a daughter named Dinah. He had 12 sons, but he also had a daughter named Dinah. And Dinah was raped. And the person who raped her then fell madly in love with her. And he came to Jacob and he says, I want to marry your daughter. Well, when the brothers hear what's happened to their sister, they're upset because this has brought shame on the family. And so they say, there's no way we're going to let her to marry you unless every man in your village gets circumcised. Well, the man who loved Dinah, his father was a chieftain. He was one of the leaders. So he was able to influence them, and they all decided the men were going to get circumcised. And on the third day, when they were so sore they couldn't even move, Simeon and Levi went in and slew them all, killed them all. How many of you remember that? And Jacob says, what have you done? We're in this land where everyone else knows about us. And they said, this is a good lesson for everyone to know. You don't bring shame on our family or we'll take vengeance. Now here's what's interesting. Only 2 of the 12 brothers went and did this. Simeon and Levi. You want to know why? Because Simeon and Levi, that was their full sister, not half sister. Jacob had 2 concubines, 2 wives. Well, here's what's interesting. Simeon and Levi, this is one of the problems you have, especially in, today with divorce and remarriage, blended families, you'll have siblings and half siblings, but it's kind of interesting. There's something about having the very same mother and the same father. And Simeon and Levi said, it's not good enough that these guys are circumcised. They brought shame on our family. We're going to bring shame on the whole village. Killed them all. Yeah. That's why today, still in the Middle East, you have to worry about honor killings. A woman gets out. She has sex before marriage. Even if she was raped, she's killed. She's brought shame on the family. You guys don't understand that. Not in the culture we're raised in America. But this is what aske moneo is talking about. Now, aske moneo can also refer to shameful behavior without sexual overtones. And in those cases, it simply means to act in defiance of social and moral standards. But most of the time, it has a sexual connotation to it. So to translate aske moneo as rude doesn't do it justice. In fact, that's a horrible translation because it means so much more than simply being rude. When you hear love is not rude, that's not what Paul is talking about. What Paul is saying is that true love, agape love, will never try to coerce someone to do something shameful. Something that goes against social and moral standards. Women, listen to me. I'm speaking directly to you. If a man ever says, if you love me, you would let me. You tell him, if you love me, you would never ask to let you until we're married. Yeah. You see, true love, agape love, will never bring shame or dishonor upon the other person. It'll never act in a way that would bring shame or dishonor upon the person it loves. Can I make it any clearer than that? Go do your own study. You'll find out I'm right. People, I don't want any of my children or my grandchildren being coerced to do something that would bring shame or dishonor upon them. Anyone who would do that does not love them. Not with a true love. Not with an agape love. Because a true love's not going to do that. Now, Paul grouped all 3 of these characteristics together because they all have the same root cause, which is pride. Now, I'm going to go a little bit deeper. I don't know why I do that, but I'm going to go a little bit deeper because there's more to pride than what most people realize. In fact, pride can be broken down into different subcategories. Pride is the main category. Then you have 3 subcategories underneath it. Egotism, egoism, and narcissism. Now, bragging is an outward manifestation of pride. It falls under the main category of pride. But this isn't just bragging. This is ostentatiously bragging. There's a big difference. You're bragging because you can't stand for anyone else to have the attention. You have to have the attention. If they tell a good story, you tell a better story. If they buy a boat, you buy a bigger boat. If they have a nice home, you have a nicer home. Yeah, ostentatiously bragging. Arrogance is an attitude of pride. It falls under the subcategory of egotism. I'll explain it in a minute what egotism is. Acting unbecomingly almost always accompanies arrogance. But it takes it a step further. However, acting unbecomingly falls under the subcategory of egoism. Not egotism, egoism. Now let me explain the difference between egotism and egoism because there's a difference. Egotism is when you think more highly of yourself than you ought to. It's an exaggerated sense of self-importance. Again, that's what Paul was warning us about in Romans chapter 12, verse number 3. Notice what it says. I give each of you this warning. Don't think you are better than you really are. Nothing's wrong with thinking that you're as good as what you really are. But don't think you're better than what you really are. Be honest in the evaluation of yourselves. So egotism is when you think more highly of yourself than you ought to. In fact, you think you're superior to others or better than others. And this is the root cause of arrogance. Now, egoism is different than egotism. Most people don't realize that because they tend to use these two terms synonymously. But they are not synonyms. They mean two different things. So what is egoism? Egoism is when you are so self-centered you only consider yourself and your own interest. As a result, you have a total disregard for how your actions affect others. If your actions hurt somebody else, well, that's just too bad. You're going to live your life the way you want to, regardless of how it affects others. And that's the cause or the root cause of acting unbecomingly. It's also a subcategory of pride. In other words, pride is the main category, and egotism and egoism and narcissism are subcategories underneath pride. Is everyone with me? Now, a person who acts unbecomingly is called an egoist. In fact, let me explain the difference between an egotist, an egoist, and a narcissist. I hear people make this comment all the time. Well, they're just narcissistic. They're a narcissist. No. Let me explain the difference between an egotist, an egoist, and a narcissist, all right? An egotist believes that he's superior to others or better than others. His feelings of superiority will usually manifest itself as arrogance, which is a subcategory of pride. An egoist doesn't necessarily feel that way, but he's so self-centered he only cares about himself and his own self-interest. So he'll have the tendency to act unbecomingly because he doesn't care how his actions might affect others. A narcissist and an egotist a narcissist is an egotist that takes it a step further. They actually combine their egotism with egoism, creating narcissism. In other words, they not only think that they're superior to others, but they're also so preoccupied with themselves that they're willing to take advantage of others because in their mind, they're the only ones that really matter. Think of it like this. All narcissists are egotists, but not all egotists are narcissists. So, as you can see, these three terms are closely related, but there's a subtle difference between them. You see, you don't have to be an egotist to be an egoist. Neither do you have to be a narcissist to be an egoist. And it's important that you understand that because many people are egoistic and they don't even realize it. They're not egotistical. They're not narcissistic, but they are egoistical. Now, I'm going to use an extreme example to illustrate that you don't have to be egotistical or a narcissist to be egoistic. And the example I'm going to use, which I hate doing, but you'll really understand it, is suicide. A young person who commits suicide isn't egotistical. In fact, they're usually the exact opposite of someone who's an egotist. Instead of feeling that they're superior to others, they wonder, what's wrong with them? Why am I like this? Why do I feel this way? Why am I not happy? And they're not narcissistic. They don't have an inflated sense of their own importance. And they usually have empathy for others rather than a lack of empathy. So they're not narcissistic. But the pain and the despair inside of them is so great that it puts them in a place where they don't even think about what their death might do to others. That never crosses their mind. And if it does, it's far outweighed by their pain, their despair, and their depression. In fact, all they can really think about is ending their pain, ending the feelings of despair and depression. The truth is, in that condition, they are in every sense of the word an egoist because they're not even thinking about how their death is going to affect those who love them. Let me tell you, there's nothing worse for a parent than to lose a child, except for a parent to lose a child who's committed suicide. There's nothing worse. Because on top of the grief is an overwhelming guilt. They're wondering, what did I do? Or what didn't I do that made them want to take their life? They're asking themselves over and over again, what could I have done? Or what should I have done? Was I blind to what was happening in their life? Why didn't I see they were in that position? That's why I say there's nothing worse for a parent than to lose a child, except to lose a child to suicide. Now, I realize that suicide is an extreme example to use, but the reason I used it is because I wanted you to see that you don't have to be an egotist or a narcissist to be egoistic. An egoist is simply a person who becomes so self-centered they only consider themselves and their own interest. And as a result, they have a total disregard for how their actions might affect others. If their actions hurt somebody else, well, that's just too bad. They're going to live their life the way they want to, regardless of how it affects others. And you don't have to be egotistical or a narcissist to be egoistical. Sometimes I've seen women do this. They get beat down to the point where either I'll leave or will take my life. They're not an egotist. They're not narcissistic. So sometimes when we use these terms as synonyms, we cause a lot of problems. And it keeps us from truly understanding people. But my main point is this. We're getting off. We want to talk about love, right? All three, bragging, euamahi, arrogance, thusiao, and acting unbecomingly, askemaneo, all have the same root cause, pride. Now, you can break each one of them down into subcategories: egotism, egoism, and narcissism. But they all fall under the same main category of pride. Bragging is the result of pride, not just any type of pride, ostentatious pride. I have got to be the center of attention. I have got to be the focus. So I'm going to brag all the time. Sometimes you call that, if it's a little person, little man syndrome. Anyone ever heard that? Oh, yeah. Arrogance. It's egotism. But it's a little bit more. It's an exaggerated sense of self-importance. Thusiao. And then, of course, acting unbecomingly. Askemaneo. It's egoism. I really don't care how this affects you. I just want this and need this. I want to do this. I'm going to coerce you into it. Now, the reason I go into such detail is because in the Christian world, we don't understand balance. If your child wins a prestigious scholarship, feel free to brag on them. You're proud of them. Not in an unhealthy way, but in a healthy way. Something's wrong if you don't tell your child, I am so proud of you. Every time one of my kids graduated, not high school, but college, whether it's a master's or bachelor's, master's, doctorate, we go out to eat, celebrate them. I always say the same thing. In our family, we value three things: God, family, and education. And I'm so proud of you. I put the spotlight on them. When my kids do things, I put the spotlight on them. When you do something great, I want to hear about it. I want to share that on Facebook, but I'm not really a big Facebook fan. But anyways. But there's a difference between bragging and ostentatious bragging. And you know, the Christian world many times is not taught that, because we just, love does not brag. I love you. I don't want to tell you what a great job you did because that's bragging. No. Let me tell you, when I get home in heaven, you know what God's going to greet me with? And I don't deserve it. But just because of it, well done, good and faithful servant. Well done, Alan. Really? Look at all the things I screwed up, God. Yeah, but you did one or two things right. Yeah. Now, I bring this up because if we don't know what these words mean, then we screw up our kids too. If your kid thinks they're so important that no one else is important, that's arrogance. Fusiao. If they're trying to get someone to do something that would bring honor or shame upon them, that's askemoneo. We don't do that. Love doesn't act that way. Is everyone with me? Do you care about knowing this? I tell you, this will save you a lot of heartache, and it'll help you in raising your children to be healthy, to look for certain things in a mate. And when they see certain things, that's not the mate they want. And also to raise your kids to be healthy. Now, pride, which is the main category, these three things are subcategories: egotism, egoism, and narcissism. Okay, pride causes major problems in relationships. Turn to Proverbs chapter 13, verse number 10. I want you to notice what it says. Pride only breeds quarrels, but wisdom is found in those who take advice. Now, according to Proverbs chapter 13, verse number 10, pride breeds quarrels, and quarrels simply means fights. In fact, whenever I see pride, I know there's going to be contention. I know there's going to be quarrels. People are going to be fighting. It might not be fist fighting, but they're fighting. At our house, Lisa and I never raised our voice, but one time, it gets a little cool sometimes. Some of you know what I'm talking about. And Micah said, "Are you two fighting?" And she was little, said, "Honey, we're not fighting. We just disagree." And she'd heard me say this one time, so she said, "Well, why don't you agree to disagree?" Good idea. But anyways, now there are three reasons that pride breeds quarrels, breeds fighting. Number one, pride prevents communication. Number two, pride provokes criticism. And number three, pride prohibits confession. So let's look at these three things. First of all, pride breeds quarrels because it prevents communication. Notice what James chapter 1:19 says. "This you know, my beloved brethren, but let everyone be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger." Now I want you to notice he starts off with, "This you know." What do we know? We know that we should be quick to hear and slow to speak, but we don't do it. Why? Believe it or not, the root cause is pride. Yeah. Most of us are quick to speak and slow to hear. Why? Because we think we already know the answer. And we're too arrogant to listen. I know what you're going to say. I know what you're going to say. In a relationship, a prideful person thinks they already know what the other person is thinking or feeling. So when they should be listening, they're talking. And that causes them to jump to the wrong conclusion. And guess what that's going to do? It's going to breed quarrels. So pride prevents communication. And in doing so, it breeds quarrels or fights. Secondly, pride breeds quarrels because it provokes criticism. Notice what Proverbs 21:24 says. "The proud and arrogant man, mocker is his name. He behaves with insolent fury." Insolent means contemptuous or rude. So he's, should I just say it? Snarky. But anyways, the word mocker is translated from the Hebrew word lutz, and it refers to a person who mocks others or ridicules others by pointing out their faults. The truth is, you'll never see a proud and arrogant man that doesn't make fun of others. And pretty soon he's going to get the reputation as someone who ridicules others. He's a mocker. And that's why it means mocker is his name. He's known for cutting other people down, for belittling other people. He mocks people. So naturally, making fun of people is going to breed quarrels. No one likes a person like that. Pretty soon, people are going to get their fill of it. Guess what? I don't even speak to that person. Yeah. They breed quarrels, fights. And last but not least, pride breeds quarrels because it prohibits confession. James 5:16 tells us to confess our faults one to another. But pride prohibits us from doing that. Mark Twain once said, "Tempers get us into trouble, but pride keeps us there." The 5 most important words in any relationship are, "I'm sorry, I was wrong." Those are the 5 most important words. Right underneath it is, I love you. But even before I love you, you can say, I love you. But if you can never say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. So when men come to me before they're married and say, you got any advice for me? I say, yes, you're wrong. Say you're sorry. What if I'm not wrong? Trust me, you're wrong. Say you're sorry. I'm just teasing. Most relationships are destroyed because of pride. And it's because pride prohibits us from confessing our faults. Notice what Proverbs 16:18 says. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Pride destroys relationships because it will never admit it's wrong. That's why pride goes before destruction. Now, here's something I want you to see. Pride does not cause destruction. Pride just doesn't let you change course when destruction is ahead. How many of you know there's a red light going on, there's something blaring inside, says, don't say that, don't say that, don't say that, and you still said it? And as soon as you said it, you thought, what was I thinking? And then pride says, well, that was the truth. Well, you shouldn't have said it. At least not that way. Because we're to speak the truth in what? Love. Agape love. And love doesn't do these things. Yeah. So, if you're a prideful person, let me ask you a simple question. When it comes to relationships, do you want to be right or do you want to be reconciled? Sometimes, and I don't do it anymore now, you'll see Bobby, but a couple will come to me, they got marriage problems, and they'll all start talking. I say, well, let me just say this, you're both wrong. You're both wrong. And I said this in a sermon one time, and I mean, it just shocked people, and I got a lot of emails on it, but it's still true. But I would say it before I ever preached it, and I would say, I just want you to understand something. God doesn't fix marriages. God fixes people. Your marriage is not some tangible thing that we can pull out of a box and take it to a mechanic and they can fix your marriage. No, a marriage is nothing more than a covenant between 2 people. And the problem with marriages is the people. So God doesn't fix marriages, God fixes people. And if you're not willing to be fixed because of pride, then your marriage is not going to be fixed. That's good preaching, Pastor Allen. You know, prideful people would rather wreck a relationship than admit they're wrong. The value of being right. Or I should say, they value being right more than they value being reconciled. And that's why it says that pride breeds quarrels. It does. Now, I'm going to say something that if you're a prideful person, you're not going to like. But if you're going to be saved, you have to come to this conclusion. You are not a good person. Probably the main misconception of people is that good people go to heaven. The problem with that is no one's a good person. Not if you just bared open your heart, your soul, everything within you. You're not a good person. Paul wrote, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Come short of the glory of God. In other words, God's standard of perfection. And he used the word sin because sin doesn't mean you weren't trying to hit the mark. It simply means you missed the mark. You might try to be a good person, but I want you to understand, even trying to be a good person, you still have something that everyone has, an Adamic nature, the flesh. Therefore, you're a sinner. And God, being just, must punish sin and reward righteousness. And once you become a sinner, you're not righteous. So God had to step in covenant with us through Jesus Christ. So that we became one, so that Jesus would become our sin, be punished for our sin. And then when all our sin was paid for, God raised from the dead because we're joined with him in a relationship. We're one spirit. We're resurrected with him, and his righteousness becomes our righteousness, just like our sin became his sin. But to receive Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you have to come to the fact that you're not a good person. The hardest person to win to Jesus is the person that thinks they're good. I think I'm a good person. You think you're good enough to go to heaven? Well, compared to others, well, I got news for you. Others are not going to heaven unless they have Jesus. So if you're here this morning and you've never received Jesus, what's kept you from it is probably pride. The fact that you don't want to admit that you're not a good person, that you can't make it to heaven on your own, that you need Jesus. I tell you this all the time. I'm a broken person. I don't mean broken that all these bad things. God's been so good to me, but I have seen the effects of sin to the point that I just want to beg people to receive Jesus. Let's stand. Two things for the altar call. If you're in a marriage, don't ask your mate or try and coerce them to do something dishonorable or shameful. Don't do it. Love doesn't act unbecomingly. Don't be arrogant. Don't think that you are the most important person and you never place importance on them. Allow others to have their limelight, their spotlight. Don't be ostentatiously bragging. Bring a love into your marriage. Put the spotlight on the other. Brag about their accomplishments. And there's nothing wrong with that. Something's wrong if you don't think you have the best wife and the best kids. If you don't think you have the best grandkids, well, you don't. I do. But anyways, something's wrong. Understand what Paul was talking about. Because sometimes we screw ourselves up thinking, well, Paul said love doesn't brag. Know what that means. Love's not arrogant. Know what that means. Love does not act unbecoming. Know what that means. And now let's look at the other thing. Salvation. If you're here and you never received Jesus, be wise enough to know you can't go to heaven without him. So I'm going to give you this opportunity, and it's real simple. I'll say a simple prayer. If you want to receive Jesus, all you have to do is repeat this prayer. Now, the prayer's not magic. It's not like abracadabra, I get to go to heaven if I say abracadabra. No. Just because you say this prayer doesn't mean you're going to heaven. But if you believe what you're saying, your faith is in Jesus, and you make him Lord, you're going to go to heaven. Your sins will be forgiven. The righteousness of God you now possess in Christ. So I want everyone to bow their heads, close their eyes. If you want to receive Jesus, just repeat this prayer after me. God, I know I'm a sinner. I'm not good enough to go to heaven on my own. But I believe you still love me. And because you love me, you sent Jesus to fix the problem. You sent Jesus to covenant with me, to become one spirit with me, to be made my sin so that my sin could be punished in him. And I believe that when all my sin was punished, God, you raised Jesus from the dead. And the moment that you raised Jesus from the dead, because I'm in him, I'm joined with him in covenant, I was regenerated. I was born again. And the same spirit that raised him from the dead, I believe now lives within me. Jesus, thank you for saving me. I confess you as my Lord. Now, with every head bowed, every eye closed, if you said that prayer and you meant it, no one's looking but me and not going to embarrass you. I want you to be brave, and I want you to raise your hand real high right now. All you're saying is, I said that prayer. See the hand there. See the other hand out back there. Anyone else see the hand right there? Anyone else? That's three. See the hand back there? That's four. Anyone else? Best decision you'll ever make. All right, let's give those four a hand. Bobby.